ringer shirt, you know what that means. It's time for some PJ Talks. You also probably know that because I wrote it down in the place that you clicked. The sort of internet naming conventions kind of take a lot of the mystery out, don't they? I saw Dora the Explorer, or Dora the Explorer. I don't know which one it's supposed to be. It's my birthday, and I decided to see Dora. Dora is a strange movie. It is this very weird mix of sincere and ironic, in a in a really weird way, because it's not like it's gets too far into the jokes that it's insincere. It seems intentionally insincere in parts and intentionally just incredibly deeply sincere in other parts. And if you know me, I'll say it's unsurprising that the sincere parts are really good and the insincere parts are unsustainable. I was talking with my dad after the movie, and we were talking about sort of this unsustainability of irony and of insincerity, and really there's sort of this gap of investment between what it takes to make something that's insincere and what it takes to watch something that's insincere. Because why would you pay to see a 2-hour movie that is of something you don't care about, and is something that the people making the film at least show not caring for it, right? That's why I think these sort of things work a lot better on sort of internet side. It's a lot easier to watch a college humor video than it is to go out to the movies, get a ticket, get the right time, just spend the time investment and sort of the self-investment that it takes to watch a movie in a theater. Whereas with an internet video, you just click it, and it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I don't think many of them are like as long as 10 minutes or anything like that. But one of the things that is sort of from maybe a bored position really appealing about the insincere take or the ironic take is that it causes discussion. You don't have to be deeply invested in something to have your interest piqued at sort of a South Park take on whatever it is. You don't have to really hate something to see it sort of pick itself apart. But you also don't have to have knowledge and investment to make those kinds of discussions. Like, I think about how there were a lot more people talking about Sharknado than watched Sharknado. It was great for marketing. I'm sure lots more people saw it than would have if it didn't sort of have the premise that it did, which, trying to untie that knot is really wild. But, people were still talking about it even though they hadn't taken the time investment to actually watch it, right? Sharknado, maybe if it was sincere, might have had more sort of a core audience to it. Now, of course, I'm someone who thinks that the cult film is really good. I'm not. I'm a bad capitalist. I say as if I try to be one. But essentially, it means that it's hard to keep investment in something that you are making to be removed from something. Because even people who are disinterested in whatever you are picking apart through itself, the act of watching it doesn't automatically mean sort of the irony that maybe people are hoping it will mean. If I say, yeah, I went to the Dora movie, it doesn't automatically read as something done out of I can't even say spite or malice because it isn't that strong of an emotion. It's just indifference, right? It's uncaring. It's not strong emotions you're drawing out of people. It's ones that are very weak. And so when you're telling a story and telling a story in an environment where it is massive blockbusters, right? You need to draw those emotions out. Now Marvel does this a lot through sort of this creation of a fear of spoilers. You think of the marketing around Endgame, where it's Chris Evans turning chair around. So much easier to do with a rolly chair, and saying, "Hey, don't do spoilers." And it gets this FOMO's fear of missing out that drives the emotions of wanting to be in on stuff, as well as having characters and building up these characters who you have strong emotional connections to. That's why when Iron Man dies at the end of Endgame, people are very respond to it a lot, because these are characters who they are invested in. And so if you build your film, you build your story off of not being invested in the thing that you are telling, who's gonna pay attention to 2 hours of that? Now I want to circle back around and say Dora wasn't all that. Dora swung wildly between just such heart-wrenching sincerity and such weird turn of sort of indifference to the source material, irreverence to the source material, I should say. I should do these more often. It's how I stay hydrated. But that's for the most part. There's this really, really fantastic part at the beginning where Dora and Diego are 6, and Dora, while eating dinner, stares into the camera and says, "Can you say delicioso?" And Michael Pena, who's playing Dora's dad, is like, "What? You're doing it again!" like trying to find the camera and even trying to like turn and try and look at the camera, but just not really seeing that it's there. And not looking directly into the camera when instead you are looking intentionally around it, while not making it look like you are intentionally looking around a camera but don't actually see a thing there, is pretty hard. Yeah, no, that's always a tricky one, is getting those eye lines. And so, for one, I commend Michael Pena for that. And two, that joke landed really well. There were not many people in the theater when I went. To be fair, it is a Monday, and we went at like 3:00. Not many people could go. No, it was my dad and I, a family of 4, and then like a mom and a kid or 2. It's playing off of sort of the source material of the cartoon, not in a way that sees it as bad. It plays it off as sort of putting what we accept in this cartoon context into this it is finding amusement in the fact that it is live action, rather than the fact of the source material having done that at all. And I think that was sort of what made it such a strong joke. Speaking of Michael Pena, it was one of my favorite parts of this movie. Of course, the plot is that the parents get kidnapped or, mysteriously disappear. It's that they mysteriously disappear, they don't get kidnapped. This is going to have, of course, spoilers abound. I think you don't click on this video sort of jonesing to get a spoiler-free take on Dora. This is very, very much a kid's movie. At the same time, it also, I think, part of why it swings so wildly between is that it knows that in being a kid's movie, there are going to be adults who don't care for the thing they're watching, and so it wants to try and satiate both of these. And as opposed to getting the people going to the movies with their kids invested also in the movie that they are watching, they are trying to just sort of like hit both drums. In that sense, it feels like like the kind of kids movie that was around in my childhood that faded a little bit before my childhood did. This is one of the things that I love about Speed Racer, and I tell anyone whenever I talk about Speed Racer that it goes against a lot of the trends of movie making at the time, in one aspect by having a child actor and having an animal actor, and having these jokes that are very much very, very directed for younger kids. You know, there's the subplot entirely about getting candy, and this doesn't really do much to further the A plot, but it's just what these two characters want. They want the candy, and I think, you know, kids and myself find that relatable. There's not really as many Cheaper by the Dozens as there used to be, although I have a fantastic Cheaper by the Dozen reboot story structure in mind that I'll never get to use. Even though Michael Pena isn't in the movie too much, he brings a lot to it. He's so good. There's this one part where they send Dora off away from the jungle but into the city, and you know, they're like, oh, you got to be careful while you're there. And what they say is, some people in your school might invite you to a party, and there's gonna be glow sticks and a lot of people, and maybe those like candy necklaces, and there's gonna be music, and it's gonna sound like, and then Michael Pena goes on for like 2 minutes just like doing a song like an EDM, like half beatboxing, half just like it's so good. And it's one of those jokes that like goes on longer than it should intentionally. I suspect this might have been a piece of improv where it just says, and then Dora's dad imitates like a what are those Skrillex songs called? Dubstep. So that part was fantastic. Michael Pena and the mom too. They're both good, but I think the camera sort of favors Michael Pena. I think in part because of the name power, the star power, the name power. The movie ends with so they send Dora into the city because they have found the way to this lost Inca city that they have been trying to get to for like a decade or whatever. And so they're going to go do this expedition, but you know, they don't think that their 16-year-old child is ready. And so they send her to Los Angeles, and then the movie sort of is bookended by them being like, hey, we're going to go on another expedition, and we're going to go with you. And Dora's like, no, I think I'm going to go back to the city because now I have friends there, and you know, I want to learn about the weird, exciting culture that is high school. I'll get back to the framing of that in a second, but the movie then ends with Michael Pena and the mom. I need to look up the actress's name because they're both really good. Eva Longoria. She's been in a lot. Yeah, she was fantastic. Michael Pena and Eva Longoria were just like crying, being like, no, we want to be with our you know, we're going to do exploration with our little girl, and she's growing up, and that's so good for her, but also it means that she's changing it on, and it's this great. Michael Pena is like, I'm so happy for her, and I'm so sad. Just like repeating this over and over again as the camera pans out, but it's still focused on them two, and that's where the movie ends. Oh, I totally lied. That's not where the movie ends. That's almost where the movie ends. Wait, that is where the movie ends, because the scene that follows that is where the credits start. You know, they have like the credits here instead of here. Rolly chairs are very bad for me sitting still. But yeah, I want to go back to the framing of how Dora framed the character, not the movie, sort of being in LA and being in high school. You know, she occasionally referred to it as, you know, the indigenous population of this high school, and I must study their culture and, you know, figure out, you know, talking in academic-y ways about what most people watching the movie would consider a entirely normal experience in a way that I think could serve to make people reconsider their biases, sort of expand what people think of as normal, what people even think of as noteworthy. But I don't think it sort of leaned hard enough into that. And this is sort of part of why the movie swinging back and forth and trying to beat both of these drums makes it falter so much, is because in the same runtime, in the same story time, it still has to try to sort of touch a little bit on this, touch a little bit on that, touch a little bit on this, touch a little bit on that. And it also feels really weird to talk about the United States as the indigenous population when talking about, primarily white and Latino students in Los Angeles, instead of, the plenty of like actual indigenous. And the relationship between that and being Latino, of course, being more complicated, but also not enough to justify that, right? Because there's this history of this idea of mestizaje, of indigeneity mixed in with the colonial whiteness. That isn't enough to sort of say indigenous in the same way that the sort of connotations mean. It's complicated. Another thing that the line of this treatment of indigeneity as this academic adjacent thing was really mixed for me. I think it really landed on the wrong foot. Like along the movie, I was like, okay, this I see some positives and some downsides. Basically, how I felt, sort of distilled by the high school comments, but the last like 3 steps that the movie took landed on the wrong foot for me. So they're finding this Inca city that has these like lost guardians, and there's this like mercenary force. I was very surprised to see Tamura Morrison in this movie. So there's these like mercenary antagonists, but there's also these unseen for almost in the entirety of the movie guardians, who are often sort of this just menacing coming force, following like just behind them, and so they have to keep going quicker to make it to the parents, so that way make sure the parents are okay, and then they can leave. And one thing that those set up really nicely sort of in sort of these 3 groups was very clearly delineating between explorer and treasure hunter. So the archaeologist parents say, when we get to the Inca city, we're not there to take anything. The legends say it's full of gold, like more gold there than the rest of the world combined, and all that stuff. But no, we're there to learn, to maybe document, but it is the act of exploration and of learning from that exploration where value is found. It is not treasure acquisition. It is not stealing and looting and all of that. Only sort of walking to the precipice of actually saying those words. But throughout there's this distinction between these mercenaries who are very clearly out for profit versus these academics who are out for expansion of knowledge. And of course, looking historically, there isn't there have been many people who have called themselves explorers and sort of said that these things are the things that they want, and then done the things that the mercenaries in this movie do or would have done. There's this really fantastic line at one point where they get into the city and the group of the 4 kids are saying, there's no gold here. And someone says, maybe it was already taken by the Spanish conquistadors, or the English, or the French, or the US and the United Fruit Company. And I was like, whoa, they like name dropped the United Fruit Company That doesn't happen in movies that I see. I don't get that satisfaction ever. So that part was really good. I liked the constant sort of reinforcement of that distinction. But then it also sort of felt like I think people probably felt by playing Shadow the Tomb Raider after seeing the marketing for that, because the indigenous people are almost entirely off screen. Dora speaks Quechua at a few points. I would have to check to see how much of it was like actual Quechua. I really hope it all was, because there's plenty of people who still speak it. And so it's both believable that it is a thing that Dora would have been able to speak, having grown up in Peru. Hello, puppy. What do you want? I'm busy. It's a dog that lives upstairs. With a family, I can only assume. But it makes total sense that Dora would be able to speak Quechua, because, you know, the jungle she grew up in was in Peru, which means, I guess it means that it was east of the Andes. But also still in the mountains, which it could be the East Andes, but sort of where they run into the Amazon. Which, you know, makes then a little bit more sense as to why the city would be lost and all this stuff. You know, justifications that I know and kind of care about, but the movie would never go into. I'm busy. Come back later. It's like over halfway through the movie when we like meet face to face with the first like indigenous person and someone who only speaks Quechua. Some of the Spanish lines at the beginning of the movie had subtitles, but it was only like a handful of them. And the Quechua lines didn't, because all of the information was then relayed through Dora to the rest of the crew. And I was a little caught off guards, I guess, because the Quechua woman looked like a lot wider than I was expecting, like a lot wider than indigenous people are usually coded as someone who is, you know, whiter than people would expect. I didn't like think this too terribly bad. I was kind of hoping maybe they would get to something with it, especially when the when the guardians actually show up, the lost Inca guardians of this city of Pipata, maybe? I have no clue. These guardians are clad in metal armor that's like a little bit rounder at the top and then sort of goes out sort of like that, and they have crossbows, and they all look a lot more sort of traditionally indigenous, and but if you know anything about sort of the 1500s, metal armor that does this, crossbows in South America, is a sure sign not of the Inca but of conquistadors. And the visual language of these guardians seemed to me so clearly to say that these guardians were maybe a mix of converted conquistadors and indigenous people who then sort of decided to like defend the city or something like that. I got really excited because the armor, although the material and shape of the conquistador armor had like little etchings in it, and bits of more color added to it. There weren't like neck frills or anything like that. It seemed like this really clever mix in a way that felt really natural. Like the costume design immediately signaled to me this really complicated idea that links back to this idea of mestizaje that would also help explain perhaps why this indigenous woman representing this city supposedly locking itself off for centuries why this indigenous woman was so white. But no, this indigenous woman shows back up and then transforms herself into sort of like the queen of this city, I guess. Someone just decked out, toe to tip in gold, almost like iridescent, like almost a source of light all on her own, and just looks like Disney's Pocahontas. Like, and with just bright red lipstick, but just turns into, like, literally magically turns into, I guess magically unveils true form or something like that. This almost gross stereotype, and just the whole 9 yards. This then perpetuates this idea of, indigenous people in the jungle who haven't been contacted for centuries and all of this stuff. When we see, the metal armor, we see the mix of skin tones, we see the use of crossbows instead of atlatls. And I don't know why I had all these expectations, because the movie didn't exactly set up for me to get these kinds of really profound things. They only sort of slipped in lines like that United Fruit Company one, and that was pretty late in the game. I just got such a clear look at a story that I wished existed, right? Of this is something that is about, in some ways, deconstructing what we view as sort of the Indiana Joneses, as sort of the Nathan Drakes and the Laura Crofts. People who have knowledge as sort of one motivating factor, but who also just happen to be able to get all of this stuff. It seemed to be trying to very clearly push these two apart and say that they can't be as one. Then it just falls back on this time-honored stereotype of indigenous people, and that was really disappointing. Another disappointing character thing was, for one, Diego didn't really get much character building. Dora did, like, consistently. I think because her character is just so forward that it's hard not to write in as much character for that character. But Diego just didn't get much. Diego was present a lot, but the sort of extent of character building was less close to someone he hasn't seen in a decade. Embarrassed by being related to someone who keeps being the center of negative attention at school. And that's all stuff that's broadcasted in, like, a sentence, or even the action before the delivery of a sentence. Then during, like, the actual, like, journey part, not much. There's a romance subplot that, comes out of nowhere and goes where you would expect it to. There's a kiss at the end, but it's still centered on Dora. And it's with this girl who got just not the characterization I was hoping for. She was introduced and sort of broadcasted as sort of this, this type A, I gotta be the president of the student council, and I'm the only person in the high school who actually raises their hand, and I gotta be the best, most smartest, and anyone who tries to be smart like me, I'm gonna give them what's for. So then Dora shows up and knows non-zero amount of things, and she's like, I'm gonna be your rival now, basically. And of course, then that means that she shows up on the trip and has a romance with Diego, because they are the heterosexual couple who are not related. even though they don't do anything that is like just between them. Like they land next to each other a couple of times, and then it's the whole group. You know, they do the whole like, and then just go back to whatever. Can I be an actor in kids movies now? Have my own romance subplot? It'll be fantastic. Can I have a romance subplot with a CG character? I want to kiss one of those like dots that you put on someone. Then like for pretty much the rest of the movie, she is framed as just being still mean. It almost felt like the movie repeatedly went out of its way to make sure that she didn't have like redeeming qualities for long, right? Like it's not just that in the school context, but she is the only and last person sort of refusing that this group of four is friends. And to no real end. Like, at the end of the movie, she's like, yeah, we're friends. But you don't quite see the steps along the way because she just acts the same throughout until she changes. And even sometimes in ways where, like, how she is acting is pretty reasonable when you're stuck in the jungle, but it's just because the movie knows the plot and knows that who the main character is, that it decides to frame her as just totally unreasonable, in a way that like really disappointed me. But even with all of that, it's hard to really get across that the sincere moments were really fun. Swiper is just in the movie, like wholesale, it's a talking fox, and it's the kind of thing where essentially the rest of the movie is realistic. Boots is played as a monkey, but Swiper's just a talking fox. I learned during the credits, voiced by Benicio del Toro. He wears a mask, and at one point, I forget if it's Diego or the Sammy. Is that the girl's name? I think it's Sammy. One of those two say like, why is the fox wearing a mask? Who's gonna mistake him for another fox? And this is one of those moments that like skirts between sincerity and insincerity, because it I think is finding joy in the premise of itself in a way that is not sort of malicious to that premise. Because, you know, it's not like the movie is ruined by pointing out why is he wearing a mask, but it also at that point then just points to this weird aspect of the movie where the fox is there because it has to be. There's not much else that's fantastical in the movie, and that is never brought up. It is never brought up past people questioning it as a joke, but their questions never get any kind of an answer, and it makes the audience go, huh, what? Why is there a fox? In part because the opening has the 6-year-old Dora and Diego with their wild imagination doing what I think is the intro theme song to Dora the Explorer, with, you know, all these fantastical beasts, and, you know, they have the like a little minivan that they're driving through the jungle, and Diego has a Jaguar, and Boots is wearing actual boots, and all this stuff. And then it's shown that it's just them playing pretend. And then also at a pivotal emotional point, Boots, instead of making monkey noises, just talks to Dora in Danny Trejo's voice, and then just goes back to being a monkey. And that's also just sort of left there. And again, this is a kid's movie. It's like okay to have that stuff to some degree, but the whole of the experience, I think, is made better by not just leaving those, because it treats your audience who might buy in as almost naive, right? It more quickly turns the people who are seeing the movie because they want to see a movie about Dora and Sincerity more rapidly into the people who are seeing the Dora movie because my kid just wants to see the Dora movie and they need adult supervision or whatever. It creates this gulf between the two that I think ideally shouldn't be there, especially when you have really smart things like pointing out, yeah, there's a long history of colonialism and, looting under the guise of this other stuff and romanticizing the idea of going to somewhere unexplored and being able to take things from it and challenging a lot of that stuff. So when you trust your audience far enough to make a jab at the United Fruit Company, which might make a few people do some Googling later, why don't you trust them enough to have at least a rationale behind the talking fox with a mask? But there are things that are just fun excuses, honestly. Like there's this field of flowers that then emit spores that make Dora, Diego, and their mentor guy hallucinate, and they become their animated selves. It's just animated Dora and Diego, and it's really funny. And there's no real plot reason for any of it. It's just a good excuse to make them animated. And I feel overall neutral about it, but I think it's okay for that plot element to not have to be driving the plot forward so much and stuff. It's neat. I heard my own name so many times in this movie. What? One of the first lines in the movie is 6-year-old Dora and Diego being called for dinner, and the mom calls Dora, Diego, and I was like, whoa. I don't get that much. They're ooh, that's what that's like. It was nice. It was nice having people sort of conversationally switch between English and Spanish. It was funny when you had a character. you have the small group of characters speaking Spanish, and then you have one kid who got roped in from school being like, why did I take Mandarin? I don't understand what you're saying. And then someone says silencio, and they're like, that means silence, and it's like, I got that one, don't worry. That stuff is great. Also, the very, very end scene is this dance scene in the high school. And I noticed, just past sort of the 2/3 of the frame was someone in a manual wheelchair. So, they're all doing dances, and at some point they spin, and, they're doing stuff with their arms while they spin, but the person in the wheelchair is just spinning. And that was just a nice little thing to put in. It's something that I hadn't thought of, even with a wheelchair using friend who talks about musical theater a lot. It was something that made me kind of stop for a moment and be like, hey, that's pretty alright. It didn't bring attention to itself. It didn't feel tokenistic. It just felt actually inclusive. Maybe more disability rep throughout would have been nice, but also I'm not gonna ding this movie too hard for that because it was also doing other things. Walking out of the theater, I was thinking about this sort of wild swing between sincerity and insincerity, but that was such a sort of defining moment to end on, where you have this musical number, which is in some ways itself moment to moment swinging between hokey insincerity, unexplained phenomena, and the irony about what it is doing itself, while all throughout still putting in little things like that, which are in their small way really, really thought-provoking at the very least. I might say important. But things that as someone who in part went to see this movie just to be able to hear my name a bunch, like it's just, I get why that stuff is really good to have there. And so for all the weirdness around the Dora movie, its sheer existence being one of them, I felt overall positive about it in a way that I like legitimately wasn't expecting. It's very weird. It's a weird movie. I like it a lot. Michael Pena needs to be more in more stuff. I've been talking for like an hour. I'm gonna call it. Good night, y'all. And another thing, why do you make your movie at all insincere when really like the main defining thing of your secondary character, who is like had the most second most character name recognition in the movie, Diego, is like defined by being framed in a bad light for thinking poorly of Dora's just deep sincerity. Why do you do that?